Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another Brilliant Metrics webinar. Today we are talking about brand vectors, which is a process we innovated here at Brilliant Metrics, helping you quantify your brand in a way that helps you measure as well as continuously improve your brand positioning in your audience's mind. A couple of housekeeping items. First of all, post questions into chat. I'll be monitoring the chat both on the live stream as well as in the Zoom meeting. So please do get your questions in chat. If I don't address them live, I will for sure address them at the end. And a copy of these slides will be emailed to you. If you are coming in the live stream, there will be a QR code you can scan at the end. Otherwise, if you came in through the webinar link, we have your email address. So I'll make sure to get you a copy of these slides. A little bit about me. My name is Steve Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO here at Brilliant Metrics. I am a public speaker. I love to talk about continuous improvement in marketing, digital marketing, get into the geek area of that stuff. Kind of falls back on my roots as a software developer in the earlier days of my career. In addition to the public speaking, teaching, and training that I do here with Brilliant Metrics, I'm also an instructor with UWM School of Continuing Ed. A little bit about Brilliant Metrics. We are a B2B digital marketing for our digital first marketing agency. That means that we love digital tactics, but we are more than happy to incorporate traditional tactics because the more channels, the better. That said, it's faster to iterate and learn on the digital front. Our clients choose us instead of other agencies because we help them with that continuous improvement. We help them grow, but not just in the results, in their technologies, in their skills, in their capabilities, in their processes. We help them grow across the board. All right, today's agenda. I'm talking fast because we have a lot to cover in a short webinar here. We're going to recap a little bit about the difference between brand and branding. Brand vectors are a valuable tool for both, but I want to make sure that everybody understands what the difference is as we go through the rest of the presentation here today. We'll define a brand vector. We'll talk about how to pick the brand vectors that matter for you and your organization. I'll talk about collecting data, addressing any misalignment within your organization, and then how can you use brand vectors as a tool to benchmark yourself against competitors. So first, brand versus branding. These are two terms that often get mixed up. When a marketing professional talks about brand, they ought to or usually are talking about brand perception. How is your brand perceived out in the marketplace? So that comes into a couple of different components. One is awareness. Do they even know who you are? They can't perceive you if they don't know who you are. And so can they recall your name? Do they know what industry you're in? Do they know what you do? Do they have any idea what makes you special? Second is sentiment. Do they like you? And this is one of my favorite brain hacks is that the more times you get a brand in front of somebody, the more likely they are to like you, whether or not any of those experiences are things that would make them like you. So sentiment is, do they like you? How do they feel about you, right? And then finally, personality. How do they interpret your brand if they were to personify it? Human beings are naturally wired to connect with people, and so we have a tendency to personify things that are not human. And that includes brands. We put them in buckets as if they are people so that we know how to relate to the messages that come from them. It's that last component that really brand vectors helps you quantify and solve for. What are the personality aspects of your brand, and how do you measure that? How do you make sure there's alignment among all the different folks that interact with you and that you want to influence? Do they all understand your brand to have the same personality? If they were to pretend you're a human being, would that look roughly the same? That's what we're going to talk about today. The flip side of the coin is branding, which I think is more accurately called brand expression. This is how your company expresses itself. These are the choices you make as a marketing professional on your tone, your language. It gets into your voice. Does this sound like your brand? It's also your visual identity. Everything from your logo to the fonts and colors that you use to produce your content, your website, your collateral. And then finally, what sort of experience do you produce, not just through your website, not just through your scripted events, but the unscripted interactions that the marketplace has with your team, whether that's customer service or sales or thought leaders that are out there, evangelizing your brand. What does that experience look like, and is it consistent? Brand vectors play a role in making sure that it is. And I'm excited to dig into how in the second half of our presentation today. These two topics are closely related. Your brand or your perception in the marketplace influences your branding, but only after you do the research to understand how your brand is perceived in the marketplace. So that includes understanding to what degree there's awareness of your brand out there, what that brand sentiment is. And then the third component, again, understanding what the personality of your brand is in the marketplace. That's where brand vectors shine, is in doing that research that then can inform the branding. On the flip side, the branding that you do, that brand expression out in the marketplace, should be reflected in your brand perception, but only if you do an effective job of activating the brand. So research does the input and helps you understand what your brand position is in the marketplace, that you then use that to refine your brand expression, which then provides, hopefully gently pushes the marketplace, your audience, your customers, your vendors, your channel partners, your prospects, into feeling differently about the brand over time, which then should be reflected in the research, and it's a virtuous cycle. So what is a brand vector? Well, at its essence, a brand vector is simply a line, right? It's a continuum or a spectrum, and your brand has a position on this line. At the ends of the line are two believable extremes. These are two possible positions your brand could take that denote two different personalities or two different worldviews that your audience may or may not share. So, for example, you could have a brand vector where on one end is casual. We show up to work in flip-flops and shorts, and that's good, right? On the other hand, you could have a brand that is extremely buttoned up. You show up to work in a business attire, and jackets are preferred, right? So, your brand exists somewhere on this continuum. It may take a position on one of the edges, in which case this is a brand vector that you really take a position on, right? Or your brand could be right in the middle. We're business casual, where we use some professional speak, but we're not cursing like sailors in the office, but we're also not speaking with perfect, eloquent English every time we're on camera. This type of personality probably, it expresses itself in many different ways. Another one might be, maybe you're tried or true, or maybe you're very bleeding edge in the solutions and the thought leadership that you're putting out there. Your brand, again, probably exists somewhere on this continuum. It could be in the middle, in which case this is not a particularly exciting brand vector for you and your brand, or you could be out there on one of the edges. The key thing is that these are two believable extremes. So a brand has to want to embody both ends of the spectrum. Otherwise, it's not a useful brand vector. So, um, uh, mean versus kind, or what's up on the screen, stupid versus genius, right? Every brand's going to want to be on the genius end of that. Every brand's going to want to be on the kind end of that. Nobody's going to want to be mean. Nobody's going to want to be incompetent, right? So these have to be two believable extremes in order to be an effective brand vector. Otherwise, it's not useful for positioning yourself. Everyone just aspires to be on one side of that line. So when I talk about these brand vectors, one of the questions that comes up is there a list? And the short answer is yes, we've developed one. But if you want to go off the reservation with this, as long as you are sticking to those two believable extremes and you're not going off into territory where nobody would want to be on one end of that line, you're safe in developing your own brand vectors as well. Up here on the screen is a list of some of the brand vectors we've used in the past that we found to be very effective with clients. I will send a link to this PDF to download it that you can use this list to refer to if you want to apply this brand vector process in your organization. But it is, again, if you want to come up with your own, go for it. There's nothing saying that you have to stay within the predefined list here. Okay, so how do you select the brand vectors that matter to you? Because if you couldn't use all of this list, it would be too much information for anybody to understand if they were trying to create content and wanted to refer back to your brand vectors. Or if you wanted to run a survey, you can't survey everyone with all of these vectors. You need to whittle this down to the brand vectors that matter to you. And so before you can really identify where you sit on each one of these vectors, you want to select 5 to 10 that matter to you right now, and then you'll further refine those later, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And the easiest way to do this is to survey some key stakeholders. You want to form a committee of people who are going to be closest to the customer and the relationship and or the vision and direction of the company. So this includes sales, customer service. They're going to be really close to what the customer or the prospect or the marketplace thinks about your brand. They're the one interacting with those folks every single day. Grab a couple of those folks on the front line that really are of the they're the type of people that you could count on to give you good objective feedback. On the vision end of things, your senior leadership and your marketing team certainly know where they want the brand to be and that where they're positioning the brand in the marketplace. Get a couple of those folks on your committee as well. And then ask them, of this laundry list of brand vectors, in which of these do we really stick out? Where are we the odd duck compared to the competition or the rest of the marketplace? And then second of all, which of these from a value standpoint or from a marketing standpoint do we hang our hat on being at one of the extremes, right? On which of these do we just naturally position ourselves? The goal is to capture 5 to 10. And that might require a meeting to whittle that list down after you survey that group. The vectors that really seem to matter, and I say seem to because you'll find out quantitatively in the next step which ones actually matter. Again, are the ones that are you've got a polarizing position, you're off on one of the two extremes, and or they differentiate you in the marketplace. So once you've selected those vectors that you think matter to you, the next step is to collect some data. So the most effective way we found to do this is to publish a survey. Who do you survey? Well, you want to survey the senior leadership separately from the employees. The reason being, we found in many organizations, the senior leadership is thinking that the brand is positioned over here when, the rest of the rank and file believe that the brand is positioned over here. So definitely separate out those two. You want to survey your vendors. Your vendors interact with you on a regular basis. They have a really good idea of what it's like to work with you and what the brand personality looks like based on the team members that they interact with. Channel partners, it is critically important you have alignment here. They're representing your brand in the marketplace. So whether it's a rep, a dealer, a distributor, a retailer, anybody who is hawking your goods or services needs to be in line with your brand. So survey them. And then finally, the obvious one is your customers. You want to understand how they feel about you. What personality boxes do they put you and your brand in? I would strongly recommend incentivizing these surveys. You probably don't need to do this for the employees. I hope you don't, but you definitely need to do this when you start talking to customers and probably your vendors too. A $5 or $10 Amazon gift card goes a long way. It's a pain to fulfill. There are vendors that'll help you do that, but it really does go a long way. We've also found that if you put the survey out there and say that you will be incentivized and you put at the end, provide your address to mail the card to or an email address to send the card to, and you give them an option to check a box to say no thank you on the card, a surprising number of people get to the end of the survey, and if it wasn't an arduous journey to get there, they don't even ask for the incentive. But it goes a long way in getting people to act and get off the ledge, and just shows that you respect their time and you value their time, right? Another suggestion is the key value of these brand vectors is that it's a continuum. And so you're going to want to use a platform that lets you put a slider out as part of that survey where somebody can literally, with their finger on their phone or with their mouse on their computer, position the dot where it goes between the two believable extremes. SurveyMonkey has this tool built right in. That's our platform of choice when doing this, but there are other platforms as well. The key thing is whatever platform you go to use, make sure they have this slider tool. Pro tip, when you set up that slider, the default is like 0 to 100. You're going to want to change the totals on either side of that to negative 100 and positive 100. That will allow you to more easily evaluate whether or not that slider's average is somewhere on an extreme, because all you have to do is look at the absolute value of your result and say, is it greater than 50? And then you know if you're somewhere on the ends. Once you get the results, you're going to plug them in and analyze them. Paying special attention to which group you surveyed, you're going to want to look at which vectors have an average outside the middle. The vectors that come back as vanilla, your brand just kind of sits in the middle on this, are not ones that you presently have a stake or position on. Now, does that mean that you can't include it into your brand moving forward? No, it just means when we get to the activation portion of it, you've got a significantly greater uphill battle. So let's say that your senior leadership believes that your brand is especially, approachable and folksy and open and all of those things, but you run your brand vectors and none of those terms hit. Well, then that means that you've got some work to do on the activation side, and it's going to be a slow road to get there. Additionally, you want to keep an eye on what sort of standard deviations you see in the different groups. For the folks that are a little rusty on their stats and math, by calculating the standard deviation of a group, you understand how tight your results are. Are they all over the place, or do they form a nice, neat, normal distribution with your little bell curve and everything is nice and tight in the middle? Standard deviation will give you a good idea of that. There are other statistical methods that'll do that as well, but the lower the standard deviation, the closer everything is to that average. And then finally, where is their alignment? When you look at your vendors, when you look at your teams, when you look at your customers, when you look at your channel, who's not aligned with whom? Because it's those misalignments that are definitely the opportunities for correcting when it comes to activation. So let's jump over and talk about that misalignment. If you have two groups that are not in alignment, leadership and employees, or leadership, employees, and vendors, right? The company believes that they're over here, but the vendors think they're out here. Or maybe the channel has one set of brand vector, while your customers in the company are a different set. That means that you have some activation work to do on your brand. So again, your brand is how you're perceived in the marketplace. Your branding is your brand expression, how you are projecting yourself on the marketplace. And often, if you find that there is an issue in the research that you're getting in your brand perception, it's because there's a gap in your branding or your brand expression. So what do you do? Well, first thing, you want to take a look at your brand guide. First of all, is your brand guide being used? Second of all, does the brand guide include the brand vector research you just did or the brand positioning that you are aspiring to? Second of all, does it include those other things like that tone of voice, the experience that you're trying to produce? A lot of times we see brand guides that are nothing more than a laundry list of colors and fonts and typography and other things like that. So take this, brush it off, update it, and include the brand vectors that you're either you've gotten from your research or that you are aspiring to adjust. Review the language that you're using currently on your website, in print, in other digital, in other traditional, in events. How are you talking about yourself? How are you talking to the prospect or to the channel or to the vendor? If you're not living the brand positions that you've staked out, it's it's pretty obvious that that group isn't going to perceive you that way. So get that stuff in alignment. And then finally, you might want to consider evaluating your company values. If you have a brand vector that you believe is important and you don't have a supporting company value, or you don't have company values at all, or you're not talking about your company values with your team, this is an opportunity to do some internal branding and get that alignment. We've seen everything from signage inside the company to a brand card that employees can carry in their wallet. There's a lot of ways you can do that internal brand activation that will, pay in spades in getting your team to align with the brand perception you're trying to create in the marketplace. The next question is competitors, right? So where do your competitors sit on your brand vectors? You can't go survey your competitors' customers, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a best effort to plot them. Chances are people within the organization have a pretty good idea of where your competitors sit on your brand vectors. And I'll be honest, if you don't, most of the time you can just go out and spend some time on their website and get a pretty good feel for where they might sit. Plot your competitors, understand where you have white space. If it's a brand vector that you're the only one on that end of the spectrum, that might be a brand vector that is really worth leaning into because it will help differentiate you in the marketplace against your competitors. If it's a brand vector where you share that position with all of your competitors, it might be one that's not worth leaning into or even emphasizing at all. That just the whole industry is there, so we don't need to emphasize this. Focus on the brand vectors where you have that space between yourself and your competitors, and your brand activation efforts will bear a lot more fruit. Kind of leads to my last statement. Contrast is good. If you don't know who's up on the screen, this guy named Jesse Cole. He's the manager or owner of the Savannah Bananas, which was a minor league team that ended up kind of combining some slapstick and some comedy with baseball to create kind of the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. He wears this yellow suit everywhere he goes, and it's no different with his team. They are there to create contrast between themselves and basically everything else in baseball. Um, Contrast is good. It makes it memorable. It's why I know Jesse Cole and the Savannah Bananas names off the top of my head. It's also why I would think about going to one of their games differently than I would going to a Brewer game. So, um, position your best brand vectors, position you left or right of center, somewhere out on one of those extremes. They're shared by as many people outside your company as possible. That means they're authentic and they're true and they're already perceived that way in the marketplace. And they create that contrast or that distance from everything else in your industry. Those are the brand vectors you want to lean into, that you want to use in your marketing, in your brand activation, and really emphasize and pound home in the marketplace. So in summary, select your vectors, the ones that you think matter, because you don't know for sure until you do your surveys and you run your analysis. 5 to 10 is a good number. Much over 10, and you're going to have a hard time running surveys and getting people to answer. Use a trusted committee, focus on where you believe your differentiators are, where you believe you're an extreme, and then you're going to go test that by collecting data. Survey all your customers, your vendors, your channel partners, your employees, and your leadership, and find out where those parties believe you sit on each one of those vectors. Once you have that quantifiable data, now you know what sort of work you have to do for activation. You know where you need to get alignment. You know where you have a brand vector position that is actually aspirational and it's not currently reflected out in the marketplace. But if you want to go there, do the work and position the company to do so. That means aligning all of your material, your collateral, whether it's used internally, employer branding, externally with vendors. How are you sending invoices? every little touch point needs to align with your brand and be an on-brand experience in order to properly activate a brand. So with that, I'm going to open the floor to some questions here. I know we've got a small group today, so I don't know if we're going to have a ton of questions. If you do have questions, if you're watching this on a recording later and you want to reach out, please feel free to do so. And otherwise, I hope all of you have a wonderful remainder of your day.